Our scripture reading today will be 2 Corinthians 5:17. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here.
I had a friend years ago that moved to Poland. She actually was, she was born and raised, I think she was born in Oklahoma, grew up in Colorado, and she married a guy from Warsaw, and she married him and moved back to Poland with him and learned to speak Polish and all kinds of stuff. It was very interesting. And once in a while, she would share stories about collisions of culture, which are pretty interesting. And there was one that kind of stuck out to me I thought was pretty funny. In fact, it reminds me of a couple weeks ago, we were talking about all the many languages that we speak in the world. It leads to some interesting things. Well, she, in Warsaw, a Taco Bell opened up. And she told me that she went in for the first time to this Taco Bell, and so she's in Warsaw speaking to people who speak Polish, and they came up to her in Polish, except for the last part, and they said, "May I help you, señorita?" And she just laughed and laughed, because what they were trying to do is they were trying to be authentic, and so they thought, okay, this is a Taco Bell, we'll address people and learn some Spanish. So here's an American girl in Warsaw being asked if she wants to eat something and being addressed as señorita. I thought that was pretty interesting. They're trying to be authentic. They had the general idea, but their thinking was out of whack. We're so used to Taco Bell, we'd have to explain, say, well, no, you don't have to do that. And that's easy to do with a lot of things, where we jump in with both feet, but we're not quite on the same page. We're trying for the genuine article, but it's not working. And that even happens when people try to follow God. Making a good effort, trying to be authentic, but they're way off. And it's for one very simple reason. Their thinking's off. Their activities, their actions might be kind of in keeping with what the Bible's talking about, but their thinking is not quite in line. And you know what? Strangely enough, one of the best examples is Peter. When Peter's ideas collided with Jesus' ideas. If you look at Matthew 16:23, I'll just briefly mention what Jesus said to him. Jesus had some ideas, his thinking, and then Peter had his way of thinking, and Jesus had to pull him aside, and he told him this in Matthew 16:23, "You're not setting your mind on God's interest, but man's." He said, "Peter, your thinking's off. You got good intentions, but your way of approaching this in your mind is not in line with mine." In fact, when it came to trying to follow Jesus with the wrong thinking, I think Peter was kind of the poster child. Remember the Transfiguration? And Moses and Elijah and Jesus were there, and Peter is almost panicking. It was a pretty, weird situation. He's kind of uptight. And then he says, "Why don't we make a tabernacle for all three of you?" Not realizing that Jesus was not just the next Elijah. In fact, Luke 9:33, it says, not realizing what he was saying. It's almost as if God is commenting on the event and saying, you'll have to forgive Peter. He just doesn't get it yet. His thinking is off. And remember when Jesus was arrested? Peter's like, okay, let's go. And he draws a sword and cuts off Malchus's ear. Peter and Jesus kind of were hanging out together, but Peter's thinking was often off track. He often had to rethink things. And I think a lot of people do this, and they had to do this when they would approach Jesus. And also, strangely enough, it was almost always religious people. If you think about it, I can't think of any case where Jesus was confronted by atheists. It was always religious people. It's kind of startling to realize. I don't know if you remember several weeks ago, we talked about how he approached Matthew and said, okay, you're not going to be collecting taxes anymore. You're going to be following me, if that sounds good to you. And Matthew said, sounds good to me. And in fact, Jesus hung out with him and other tax collectors, which did not sit well with a lot of religious people. And some religious people saw him eating with these IRS guys, and they thought, this is not good. And this time, might be worth noticing, it's not Pharisees that get after him. We're going to be in in Matthew 9 here in a second. And you'll notice right away, these are not Pharisees. In fact, as far as likability scores, these guys probably score a little bit higher than the Pharisees. In fact, these are followers of John. You could say that Jesus and John had worked together. They were heading down the same path. John's job was to clear that path for Jesus' arrival. So it seems like they would be more in tune. But here's the followers of John, the disciples of John, approaching Jesus about this meal that he had with these tax collectors. And they ask him an interesting question. It's in Matthew 9:14. So this is after that meal. Then the disciples of John came to him asking, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" They were saying, this is what belonging to God looks like. Fasting. Not sitting down and eating with sinners. Sitting down and having a meal with people who sin, that's not how you're religious. You fast. You deny yourself food. In fact, the Pharisees were notorious for fasting twice a week. So 2 times, if you were a Pharisee, 2 times this week you would set aside some time to not eat. And here's Jesus not only not fasting, but eating with sinners. It says, Jesus, they're approaching him. We don't just not eat with sinners. Many times we don't eat at all. That's how you do this. That's what righteousness looks like. What you're doing doesn't match what religious people do. You're doing it wrong. That's essentially what they're implying to Jesus. They were thinking, they were trying to be genuine. They were trying to be authentic. But their thinking was as out of whack as a Taco Bell in Warsaw. They had the general concept, but they were kind of off. And so Jesus, to help them, makes it an analogy. It's in Matthew 9:15. So this is Jesus' response to them. And Jesus said to them, "The attendants of the bridegroom cannot mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them, can they? But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast." So he's saying there's a very good reason why my followers aren't fasting right now. It's because we're kind of at a wedding, and I'm the groom. My followers, depending on your translation, he says, my followers are the attendants of the bridegroom or the sons of the wedding place. He's saying fasting is usually for darker times. You don't fast at a wedding. It's not time to fast. When Sarah and I got married, if somebody came in and said, "Why are you laughing and eating cake?" we would say, "Why are you not?" Jesus is making a very important point. He's saying, this is a wedding. It's not a funeral. What you're feeling doesn't match the situation. There's this book, it's called 3 Men in a Boat. It's a very obscure book, and it's about these guys traveling around England. But I always remember this one scene. It was kind of funny. This one of the guys kind of pranks his friend. They're all in someone's house, and this woman is going to sing this beautiful song in German. And none of them know German, but the friend pretends to know German. And he tells his friend, says, "Oh yeah, I know this song. It's hilarious. It's a hilarious song." And so this guy, wanting to be part of the crowd, thinks it's a hilarious song. Well, the truth is it's a very heart-wrenching, sad song. And so the next scene is this guy laughing his head off while this woman is singing a horribly sad song. That did not go well for him. His thinking was out of whack. He says, this is a very sad story, and he's laughing. And he's laughing at the situation. This is the exact opposite here. Jesus is explaining your approach is inappropriate. Your thinking is off. It doesn't match the situation. Jesus wasn't out of line. They were. Their state of mind was not in line. It was wrong thinking. And right away, Jesus tried to make a big point. What we're doing here, when he first started teaching, he says, I need to tell you something. He was not just the next prophet. That was part of what the Transfiguration was about. So there was Moses, there was Elijah. I'm not just the next guy. We're going to change some things. And part of what he did at the Sermon on the Mount, he's saying, what we're doing here, what I'm about, is totally brand new. You'll notice throughout Matthew 5 and the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, it used to be this way. You've heard it said under the Old Covenant, this is the way it used to be. Now we're going to do this. For example, he says, you've heard it said, don't murder people. He says, I don't even want you to hate them. It's just one example. The new is replacing the old. The new is what the old was pointing to. The old got us here, but now it's time to get rid of the old to fully embrace this new thing. We're going for your heart now, not just this superficial stuff. You can't take just a little bit of the new and stick it on the old and call it good. That's kind of what he's talking about in Matthew 16. This is still part of that conversation with the followers of John. So he uses that wedding analogy, and then he says this in Matthew 9:16. But no one puts a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch pulls away from the garment, and a worse tear results. If your clothes are wearing out, you don't just stick a patch of new on it and call it good. And then he uses another analogy in 17 here, Matthew 9:17. Nor do people put new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the wineskins burst, and the wine pours out, and the wineskins are ruined. But they put new wine into fresh wineskins, and both are preserved. And he's making a point. The substance of the new wine is going to change. That's part of its nature. And the substance of the old wineskin is not going to change. And so there's going to be a problem. And when that happens, it's going to bust. And you're not just going to lose the old, you're going to lose, and you're not just going to lose the new, you're going to lose everything. So even though you're very religious, what I'm doing, what Jesus is saying, I know you're religious, but what I'm doing isn't compatible with what you're doing. You're like a guy asked to sing at a wedding. You're supposed to sing Can't Help Falling in Love. You don't sing Another One Bites the Dust. That doesn't fit a wedding. You're out of whack. You're out of place. Your thinking is off. So you are not in the same place that we are. Jesus is telling them what we're doing here is like brand new clothing. It's time to change your clothes. Your current life is like old clothing. You can't just cut off a little bit of what I'm teaching and slap it on your current life and call it good. That little bit of my teaching requires you to change. It's all about being transformed. That little bit that I'm teaching is going to change. It's like that patch or that new wine. It's going to change. And if you don't change all of you, you're not just going to lose the old, and you're not just going to lose the new, you're going to lose everything. Christianity is not made of patches. You don't look for holes in your life and just slap a little bit of Christian over it. Now this, what I'm about to say, might offend you, so get ready. You can't be a real estate agent and a Christian. You can't be a car salesman and a Christian. You can't be a doctor and a Christian. You can be a Christian real estate agent. You can be a Christian car salesman. You can be a Christian doctor. Christianity is not something you do. It's who you are. It's how you think. You can't be one thing during the week and be a Christian on Sunday. It's not just something that you add on once in a while. The whole point of Matthew 5, Jesus is saying you don't just change your actions, you change your thinking, you change your heart. In fact, your heart is the key ingredient. Here's Matthew 15:8. And what Jesus is doing here is quoting Isaiah. So this is clearly something God felt was important. Matthew 15, starting with verse 8. Talking about religious people. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. And notice this, but in vain do they worship me. That means if my heart is not part of this, I'm wasting my time. If my heart is not involved, I'm just playing church. You're not a Christian if we're playing it that way. You're just being religious. And that's why two people can go to church and it can be two significantly different things, even though they're doing the same thing. Going to church can be this patch that we slap on and then keep living life the same way. I think it's even true. I've seen it in my life where my daily Bible reading or praying, it's just something, okay, I got to do this, and then I put the patch on, and then I keep going, and nothing changes. If we do Christian activity and then walk right back into the same life, that's what we're doing. We're just sewing on patches. Can you imagine if it was your birthday and says, what would you like? I was going to ask for a new shirt, but just give me a patch. and I'll slap it on this old one. I think that'll be good. And what we're doing is we're maintaining our old life. We're kind of clinging to the old life and trying to hold it together. Say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, and I'll stop doing that, and maybe start doing a little bit of this and sew this on and patch that on. We recently did a play at where I work, and you could tell, I helped build some of the stuff, and you can tell the stuff I built. Evan's here, he can vouch for this story. The stuff I built was mostly made out of duct tape and zip ties. From a distance, it looked okay, and it did the job for a little while, but none of it's built to last. I would really recommend not living in anything that I built. It's very temporary and very flimsy. It's a temporary solution. One of our memory verses this week kind of jumped out at me. Here's Proverbs 10:25. Proverbs 10:25. See, patches and duct tape, that's not really going to do you much good in the long run. Look at Proverbs 10:25. It says, when the tempest passes, the wicked is no more, but the righteous is established forever. For our Christianity to be worth anything, if it really is durable, that's one thing. But if it's something pieced together with good intentions, when the tempest comes, it's not going to hold up. We'll start doubting, a lot of anxiety. Jesus didn't come out to distribute patches. And yet for a lot of people, Christianity is an occasional visit to the sewing machine. You know, from a distance, we look pretty religious, and it does the job for a little while. But none of it's built to last. It's very temporary and flimsy. You probably know this. Look at Galatians 3:27. Christianity is not made of patches. It's a brand new wardrobe. This is what it says in Galatians 3:27. For all of you who are baptized into Christ, because that's how you become a Christian, for all of you who are baptized into Christ, have clothed yourselves with Christ. You put on Christ. It's a brand new outfit. It doesn't come in patches. It's a whole new wardrobe. It's a whole new person. That's why Jim read for us earlier, 2 Corinthians 5:17. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he's a new creature. The old things have passed away. Behold, new things have come. So that brings up some interesting considerations. You see, there's a big difference between telling the truth and becoming an honest person. That's not the same thing. It's one thing to tell the truth. It's a whole nother thing to become an honest person. There's a big difference between gritting your teeth and clenching your fists and becoming a loving person. There's a difference between distancing yourself from people for the sake of just making things smooth out and becoming a loving person. There's a big difference between doing something godly and loving God. They're two different things. One is just patches. Another is what Jesus had in mind. From what I understand, if you get a transplant, if you have a new organ from an organ donor, you have to take medicine to keep your body, your old body, from rejecting this new organ. And you keep on living, but it's hard. And I guess it probably depends on the situation, but there's this constant struggle between the old and the new, between who you are and this new part of you. I think most of us have this kind of Christianity. We're baptized, but there's always this struggle. Always having to make sure that our worldly self doesn't reject the parts that we took on. There's always this resistance. Yeah, I'm going to church, but it's this constant fight. And there will always be a struggle, but you know what I'm talking about. I like how one woman put it. Most Christians look like they perpetually have a headache. Just enough religion to make yourself miserable. The trick is to go all in. Christianity is a whole new life. Any spiritual discomfort you feel is probably because your life is made of patches. It's made of duct tape and zip ties. So no wonder. There's a better way to do this, and I'm talking to me. There's a better way to do this, and that's what Jesus was trying to explain. He said, you guys, listen to me. You're at a wedding. And at a wedding, you have to dress like you're at a wedding. So let me leave you with this. If you're not a Christian, it's time to get a new life. If you're struggling with a patched up life, it's time to get a real life. Not the world's version of what Christianity is, but the real deal. And just like a person at a wedding, you might discover you might actually start enjoying life more. Pray you'll think about this while we stand together and sing.